Thank you. We do have a challenge that is facing us, but the challenge isn't for me. The challenge is for people that are very important when it comes to providing very brief answers to the questions that have been asked. Brief, no longer than 1 minute. Please, answers to the points that have been raised so far. And if I could ask Angela Ospiza-Nichols to take the floor. She's the representative of a very beautiful country, Colombia, and the representative of the presidential agency. Just 1 minute. Angela, please. What would the message be for our common future? Thank you very much. I think that based on what we've heard so far, the answer is relatively clear. Latin America, my country, Colombia, is in the middle of a development transition process. But we are also average at development. We are 10 years away from achieving the 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. That's a very short period of time. And countries like ours, middle high-income countries, are actually vital if we're to achieve these goals. But if we're to do that, then we need the assistance of the European Union and this new vision of cooperation, where we act together as one team working for sustainable development.
Señora Aina Calvo, directora de la Agencia Española.
Mrs. Aina Calvo, the chair of the Spanish International Cooperation Agency. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure, but I think the point I'd like to make is, firstly, development in transition sounds to me like something from a grammar lesson. No, I am transiting, you are transiting, he is transiting. Well, hopefully we are transiting, and hopefully this isn't going to be a trap. Hopefully we will be able to move towards gradation while we graduate. And I think that we need to ensure that, for example, big data doesn't manipulate us as people. There's so much research, academics. Who's controlling the information? And will we be able to build up an index? I think we would need to work with the academic world to do that. And I think we need to make it clear as well that we're not in favor of euphemisms, and we do need to change, but be clear about what kind of changes we want. And we need to also be very clear about the fact that we've always worked with Latin America, and we worked with them really preempting Agenda 2030 because we did so with empathy, with respect, cooperating. And that's something that we need to continue doing, taking on board the viewpoints of our partners rather than looking at things in north, south, south, north terms. There's a lot of southerners in the north and vice versa. So I think that we need to be very broad-minded and to look at things from both points of view, working for better social protection, working for a better shared future. Thank you. Well, maybe next time we'll just go directly to this part, because this is really impressive. Juan Pabalina from the Chilean International Cooperation Agency. Thank you, Jolita, and good morning, everybody. To tell the truth, here we are in Brussels in this exhibition centre, and that is a great pleasure for us to be here. Some of the panelists have already said that coming from graduated countries isn't something we were happy with. But we're very happy that the European Union has organized this meeting so that we can discuss this with you and we can see just how much the relationship between Latin America, Caribbean, and the European Union has advanced over time. Latin America was somewhat absent in the whole process years ago. But if you think about the populations we represent who are now involved in the development in transition process, then that's excellent. Yes, there is the grammar lesson point and the fact that we're talking in gerunds, but we have a whole series of goals that were the MDGs, that are now the SDGs, and that we have to achieve. And we are very clear on the fact that we have to move away from just using GDP as the only indicator whereby we're judged. We need new indices. And the European Union needs to take this on board. You're saying we need to work together. We very much understand your viewpoint, saying we're stronger together, saying that this is a process for achieving the SDGs. And it's true that we may not achieve all we want to achieve by 2030, which is worrying in itself. But if we work together, if we pool our efforts, we're more likely to be successful. And I think that is a possibility. I think the points raised by Alicia, by Mario, by the Vice President of the Dominican Republic were quite right in the points they made. But what's vital, as far as possible, and I think everybody would agree with this, is that not only that we need to agree on the very concept of development in transition, but we also need to agree on how we proceed towards development in a coordinated fashion with the European Union, in this case, in a world where multilateralism is going through a serious crisis, where it's being questioned, and where the whole context is so complex. We don't know what's going to happen with the trade tensions we're all aware of. We don't know what's going to happen. COP25 is meeting in Chile in December. And we're trying to work towards 2050, but walking a very difficult path. So we very much appreciate the fact of being able to give our views in this forum and to contribute to the whole narrative and debate on development in transition.
Andrea Vignola, Direttore Ejecutiva della
Andrea Vignola, Executive Director of the Uruguay International Cooperation Agency.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to speak to you today. Let me start with what others were saying. It really is a pleasure to have this conversation with you. We've been coming to this event for the last 3 years. We've been talking to Chile and the entire Latin American region about this initiative. And we need a space for dialogue. So it is wonderful to see how ECLAC, the EU, and the OECD have organized this space for dialogue today. My country has graduated from ODA, and we are now seeking responses. We don't want to just stay waiting. And so we want to work with other Latin American countries to work out what all of this means. Why are we excluded from this world of international cooperation when actually people are promoting a multidimensional model for development? So what I can tell you today is that we are living day to day, and we need to consider some of the issues that we're facing in Uruguay. Civil society in Uruguay is becoming stronger, and we need it to have the capacity for advocacy, the capacity to question. And secondly, academics and the 2030 Agenda. We're not going to be able to achieve the 2030 Agenda without knowledge. We need research from academics to be able to achieve this. We've got 3.5 million inhabitants. We need support from outside for our students. When we're talking about gender violence, that's another issue. People are saying, what is that? Unfortunately, we've grown, and we're very happy to have grown, but nevertheless, we have some significant vulnerabilities. And in this sector, what I can say is that the EU is a strategic partner, a partner with whom we want to work. We want to work with the EU because we speak the same language. We are partners within the multilateral system, and we cannot advance unless we advance together. So having this space to discuss development and transition is vital. We would like to continue working together because all we want to do, I think all of us, is live in a better world with better opportunities for everyone. We're going to be listening to young people too, and we need to do that so that we involve them in our efforts to create sustainable development across the region. Many thanks.
Hugo Sobral,
from the EEAS, which is the Diplomatic Service of the European Union. Thank you, Jolita, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before this panel. It's a great pleasure to be here and to give you the view of the EEAS, the EU Diplomatic Service. I very much welcome this discussion and the composition, the makeup of the panel, which has both Latin America and the Caribbean and the European Union working together. I think our two regions are at the vanguard of cooperation. It may not seem so at times, but it is true. In Central America, the European Union started its first steps in external relations, working on peacekeeping in Nicaragua. And we have been signing association agreements with Mexico and Chile in the 90s, so that was a first. And the first cooperation agreement between the European Union and another sub-region was signed between the EU and Latin America. I could continue with examples of how our relations have been in the vanguard in the past, but how can we ensure they're still in the vanguard in the future, in a changing world, in a world where we need to adapt. But not only do we need to adapt passively to what's happening on the world stage, but also be able to shape what is happening. And that's why in April we presented a communication of the European Union on relations between the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean. And that was an attempt to adapt to changes, but also to shape those changes. And we identified 4 priority areas for future relations that we've been working on, but that are still fundamental. One is partnership for democracy. Democracy, the question of values, rights, human rights, that's a central component of our relations with the whole region. Secondly, partnership for prosperity, focusing on interconnectivity, the digital agenda, the digital era, innovation, research. A third area is a partnership for resilience. Resilience is vital. The resilience of societies when faced with the kind of tensions that exist and threats that exist to the environment, for example. So resilience is vital for the future. And a final partnership, a partnership for global governance, a partnership for multilateralism, because our two regions are the two regions that would lose the most in a world that had no rules. And all of us have to act following a logic where we're talking about complementarity, shared values, shared goals. what happens in one region with democratic tension happens in another too. The two are reflected through immigration, for example. So we do have shared goals, a shared culture, and shared values, and we have to learn to harness the value added of our relationship. We have partners in other parts of the world. What's the value added of the relationship between the EU and Latin America? It's the values that underpin that relationship. It's the values that go hand in hand with our identity as communities of values. And then our relationship with you goes way beyond governments and executives. It's one that is brought to life by normal people, civil society. And we need to actually harness that opportunity for all it's worth. It's something that's worth a great deal. Our governments are moving forwards. The status quo isn't an option. If we don't move forwards, we move backwards. And what we want is to continue moving forwards, but together. Thank you.
¿Y cómo terminaremos?
And how are we to conclude? With a voice from the young leaders. And we're very lucky to have with us today Carlo Angeles, who comes from Peru and lives in Lima. He works in the metropolitan area there. You have the last words, sir. Well, thank you very much. The first thing I'd like to say is that I fully agree with all the points that have been made and about the importance of international cooperation, which is directed towards the transfer of knowledge. And the main point that I'd like to make is that we really do need to achieve the SDGs and Agenda 2030. There's a financial gap for achieving the SDGs, and it's $2.3 trillion. That's a huge amount of resources. There is a market at the moment. It's a government market, and it's 5 times that size. It's a market in public procurement, and that's where and this is particularly relevant. That's where international cooperation can be particularly relevant. In Latin America, we've seen significant economic, social, and institutional achievements, but now we have a new challenge, and this new challenge are the development traps. The traps which make it difficult for us to move from being a middle-income country to a high-income country. The development traps are productivity, institutional, social, and environmental. Institutional traps are important because in Latin America and all the countries of the region, we're seeing an emerging middle class. And that emerging middle class has higher expectations of public services. In addition, it has a demand, it wants stronger institutions. We're seeing a lot of lack of trust of public institutions in the region, and people are not very satisfied with their public services. This is because public services have not managed to keep up with the demand from civil society. This is where international cooperation can play a key role by transferring knowledge to us. I started with public procurement, and I wanted to say that since 2010, or in 2010, the EU established its policy on sustainable procurement. This is a policy that has met with significant success in the EU, and that's important for me and for my country, because in my country we're calling for a transition to sustainable public procurement. What do I mean by that? I mean that the state should take into account sustainable concerns in public procurement. Imagine if all of the suppliers to the state had to comply with sustainable objectives, if all suppliers signed a positive environmental pact. The purpose of the state is to generate well-being, and what more effective way of achieving that than through public procurement? It would also be a more efficient use of public resources. And I'd like to refer back to international cooperation here. The EU can play a key role in helping Peru to transition towards sustainable public procurement. procurement. And it can be successful. It can export that success from the EU to Peru. Peru can be a case study for success in the region. Thank you.
Very, very quickly, Yolita. There was one point that I forgot that I think I can say on behalf of everybody that took the floor. I just wanted to recall the fact that we're here thanks to a success story of social development. And I would like to express my thanks for that and make the point that many people have traveled for longer than 15 hours to take the floor for just 1 minute. But cooperation, equality, shared dialogue, forms of cooperation, the path that we're following in our relations with the European Union and Latin America are vital points, and we wanted to make that point here and now. Thank you, Jolita, for giving me the floor. Thank you very much, Anna, for making that point, and thank you all. We're at a historic point in time with a new path ahead of us, a new strategy. We are one family, one team working together. Thank you.